All right. Once again, welcome everybody to our 2012 post-production webinar. I wouldn't consider myself a magician. It's rather a whole lot of self-education and a little bit of passion for what I do. So let's move on and take a look at today's agenda, which Joe has already summed up. Yeah, we're going to start with resurrecting an underexposed image, and we're going back to the raw file to see what we can do in the raw processor to actually get a decent shot out of our underexposed image. Second part of that tutorial is going to be the combination of multiple exposures, which is very helpful, especially if you get a shot that is not very equally exposed. We still receive a lot of images that are either over or underexposed, or even combine both in one image. So there's a fairly quick and easy way to get around that. Third part is going to be what I call the image polish, basically a run-through of my workflow of a couple of, well, quick and easy tricks to upgrade an average image and give it a nice contemporary look. And we're going to finish our webinar with two easy tutorials. One of them is going to be the creation of digital smoke, and the other one is the introduction, or is the use of a tool that was introduced into Photoshop CS5 by Adobe. It's called the Content-Aware Fill. I'm not running on the very latest versions. I'm actually using CS5. CS6 is out already, at least the beta version is. So yeah, CS5, and I'm going to use the built-in Photoshop RAW converter, which is called Camera Raw, and I'm running on version 6.0. Version 6.6 should be out by now, but I didn't really feel the urge to upgrade yet. Other than that, let's get started. I'm usually using Lightroom to process my RAW files, simply because Lightroom has a couple of handy features, such as archiving images, some small retouch functions, things like that, that are helpful. But for now, since this is a Photoshop webinar, I'm going to stick to the built-in Photoshop RAW converter. For those of you who are using Capture One or Aperture or one of the RAW converters that come with, let's say, the Hasselblad digital backs, you are welcome to use whatever you feel most comfortable with. The functions in the RAW converters are basically the same, and even the adjustments and the sliders are very similar. For me personally, I prefer Lightroom, but that's just my personal preference. So let's get started with our first image. I told you it's going to be an underexposed shot. And let's open up the RAW, Camera Raw. Well, the first or the most important sliders when you're dealing with exposure and if you want to brighten up an underexposed image are the four sliders up here. It's the exposure, the recovery, the fill light, and the blacks. Exposure basically adjusts the global exposure, as the name says. Fill light brightens up the darker parts and the shadows of the image, and this is going to be the slider that's going to help us the most. The blacks can be compared to the levels in Photoshop. One could say, simplified, you could say that it sets the darkest point, the black point of your image. So if you have an image that is already very dark, as you can see right here, what you want to do is you want to take down the blacks. Of course, this also comes with a loss of contrast, but we're going to take care of that later on in Photoshop, and we're also going to work on the contrast slider here as well. But for now, first of all, let's bring up the exposure. So since this is a pretty underexposed image, I'm going to bring it up by a full f-stop, so it's +1, that's one full f-stop. We could even go further than that, but I wouldn't recommend it because bringing it up by one f-stop already introduces a lot of noise, especially color noise in the darker parts of the image. Now let me switch to the noise reduction real quick, because this one is already turned up. I've set that by default for this image, but we want to take it down just so you get a better impression of what the exposure, or bringing up the exposure, actually does. Now let's zoom into this dark part of the image down here, which is the girl's pants. Now this is a little too close, but you can already see that there's a lot of color noise going on in here. And once I bring up the fill light, which is going to brighten up the image, and this is something we are going to need now. Let's actually bring it up quite a lot. Let me zoom out real quick. Yeah, I think fill light by 30, 35, probably a good choice right now. Introducing a lot of noise down here, as you can already see. But we're going to use the noise reduction, and we're going to use a little trick later on to get rid of that. The recovery doesn't really do anything for us right now. I'll show you in another example what it does. The purpose of the slider basically is to recover or bring back overexposed parts of an image. Once you've brought up the exposure, you might get some overexposed parts, but we don't really have that in here. The only parts I can see right now would be his hair and the girl's hair back there, which are a little blown out, but we can ignore that for now. So we've brought up the exposure by a full f-stop. I don't really see the need to work on the temperature. I think that 5150K or 5K is good for now. I kind of like the color. It doesn't really have a color cast. There's a slight red cast over here, but that goes along with the underexposure. So we can take care of that later using an adjustment layer in Photoshop, so we'll ignore that as well. Most important is to bring up the exposure and bring up the fill light and take down the blacks. That's what we really need to do for now. Now let's give it a little bit more contrast. 45 looks good to me. And I'll leave the clarity at 10. Let me turn it down real quick. I'll play around with the slider a little bit so you see what it does. I would compare it to the high pass filter in Photoshop. It basically brings in more detail, a little bit of sharpness. So don't go too far with it. I'd say 10 is okay for now. Now, if you take a look at this image, and you're going to see it when we talk about the multiple exposure as well, I tend to keep my raw files rather neutral. I don't like too much contrast in there because I know that a lot of people like to give the look or the direction the image is going in the raw converter. I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather keep it neutral and do all the retouch and all the things that actually make out the look of an image in Photoshop. So let's keep it rather neutral. And move on to the next adjustments, which would be the curve. And it's already set to what I think makes sense in this case. We want to lighten it up a little, or brighten it up a little bit more. So we'll bring up the lights. Yeah, 20, 25, I think is okay. And add a little bit of, you see what the slider does when I move it back and forth. Add a little bit of darks, just we get out a little, or get back a little bit more contrast, which we have lost when we took down the blacks. No real need to play with the shadows because we don't want the image to be any darker. Hardly any highlights in here, so let's just skip that. Move on to the sharpening. Now, since we already do have some artifacts in this image due to us brightening up the image and the noise that's in here, please, no sharpening. I don't really sharpen any images. If I do, if I want more detail, I use the high pass filter. But do not sharpen your images, especially not the raw files. If you want to sharpen, maybe because as a stylistic element or whatever, do it in Photoshop. Don't sharpen the raw file. So all these sliders are all the way down. Now let's take a closer look at the dark parts, which is her jeans again, and we see a lot of color noise in here. Now if you bring up the luminance noise reduction, that will help a little, but it won't really do much. You see all it does is blur a little bit. So let's set it to 40. And now let's bring up the color noise reduction. And this is really going to have an impact on our image. See the difference? If I move back and forth, that's before, that's after. Now, with the noise reduction also comes a loss of detail. It blurs a little bit, but since this part already is underexposed and there's not really much to see right here, I think we can live with that. And as I said before, we're going to use a little trick later on. So let's move out and take a look at the result. And compared to the image we saw before, I think this looks acceptable. Excuse me. So let's open the image up in Photoshop and do a couple of other little tweaks to it. Now, actually, we can move on with a little trick I'm going to use to get rid of the noise we still have down here. And for that, I'm already combining, or I'm going to combine two exposures, which is basically what we're going to do in the next tutorial as well. So if we now take down the exposure a little bit, not too far, because we don't want the difference between the two to be too big. Yeah, I'd say plus 60 maybe still is a bit too much. Yeah, let's go with 50 or 45. That looks fine with me. Open that up. And now we are going to combine the two images, but I'm only going to use her jeans. So unlock this layer, duplicate it, so we have a safety copy. Unlock this layer, move it over. We can close this one, we don't need it. And make sure both layers are right on top of each other. Now all we need to do is make sure we have our brighter layer on top. We're going to apply in layer mask, clicking this little icon down here. And now I'm going to brush in the layer that's underneath simply by using the paintbrush at 100% opacity. A medium hardness of, let's say, 30%. and make sure you have set the color to black, because we are painting in a white layer mask. So if we want this layer to be seen through, we need to paint in black in here. Now I'm going to do this quickly and not very detailed. Usually I take much more time for this, but for demonstration purposes, this will do. Now we have taken the nice and bright image and combined that with the darker exposure down here, so we don't get that much noise in the darker parts of the image. Now if we zoom in, there is some noise, there are some artifacts, but keep in mind it was a heavily underexposed image and it's never going to be an award-winning shot. But it's better than dumping it in the trash bin. So we were actually able to save this one. Now we can merge these two layers together and do one last quick step to improve the result a little bit. I'm going to make a rough selection around the couple. And feather my selection. Go to select, modify, feather. Depending on the resolution and the size of the image, the radius varies, but in this case I think 55, 60, something like that, it's fine. And apply an adjustment layer curve on top. And now I'm going to boost the contrast a little bit with something called the S curve, simply because the curve looks a little bit like an S. So I'm going to bring up the brighter tones and then take down water tones in the darker parts again down here. Now this is not a real S. Usually it would more look like this, like an S, but this would take it way too far, so we're just going to do it like this. Maybe even brighten it up a little bit more, just like that. Now, there's a bunch of other things you could do to make this shot better. It still has a slight color cast. There's a whole lot of things you could actually do to improve it. There's always room for improvement. But I'm going to show you some of the things later on when we're going through my workflow of how I retouch an average commercial image. And you could apply some of the things you're going to learn there on this image as well, so I don't really want to talk about that right now. For now, I think the result, I'm satisfied with the results, and if we take a look at the before and after, it looks like this. And I think that's a fairly big improvement. So we can actually move on to the second part of this tutorial. Are we going, Joe, are we going to have some questions after the first part, or are we going to wait to the very end?
Yeah, go ahead and do your next section, and then I will collect questions from the group just after this one. So continue.
Okay, right. All right, thank you. So let's move on to the next one. Again, we're going to open up our raw file. First one was a DNG. This one is a CR2. That's the Canon. Let's click on default because I've already worked in this one. So yeah, CR2 is the Canon camera raw file. Now in this case, the image isn't heavily underexposed or heavily overexposed, but we do have parts that are overexposed and blown out, which is the windows or the doors back here. And we do have a part that is, in my opinion, way too dark for a commercial image. So she is definitely not bright enough, just as well as the part of the table back here or the floor back here. That's all way too dark. Now, if we would bring up the exposure for this part of the image, the windows or the doors would be even more blown out than they already are. So we are going to make or process one exposure for the background, for the windows and the doors, and we're going to process another exposure for basically the rest of the image. Now, sometimes, depending on the image and the result I want to get in the end, I might even do up to 4 or 5 different exposures for different parts of the image. I recently worked on some soccer sports images for the European Soccer Championship, which is coming up very soon. And I had one exposure for the players. I had one for the field. I had one for the stadium. I had one for the sky. So this is sort of like putting together your own HDR. Because what HDR basically means is high dynamic range. So if you put together, let's say, 3, 4, 5, or even more exposures in one image, you are basically building your own HDR because you are using a very high dynamic range. And sometimes it might be a little, well, annoying, or it'll take time, but in my opinion, definitely worth the result you're getting in the end. So enough talking. Let's get started with this one. First of all, we want to make sure that this part looks nice and bright. So let's bring up the exposure. Since we still have the fill light, I wouldn't take it further than a half an f-stop. So plus 0.5, 0.5 will do. We're going to play around with the recovery so you see what it actually does, and we are going to bring back some of the blown out parts. But since I'm processing an extra image just for this part, there's no need to get all of it recovered. Just you see what it does. But at the same time, you lose contrast, you lose vibrance. So don't take it too far. I'd say 15 is okay for now. We could probably do 20 or something like that. Doesn't really matter. We're going to take care of that later. The blacks can go down to 2. Actually, we can take them down to 0. Doesn't make a big of a difference. And now comes the fill light into play again. And I think we should bring that up to, yeah, 30. 30 is fine. It won't really introduce a lot of noise. Let's zoom into some, let's zoom into some darker parts. Yeah, we're now at 100%. So let's take a look at her hair. There's some noise in here, but considering that we're going to use the noise reduction, and considering that we're going to take care of that in Photoshop as well, this is something we can definitely live with. All right. So we have worked on the exposure. We have done a little bit of recovery. We have cranked up the fill light. We can basically leave the brightness and the contrast set to default, which is 50 and 25. I'll leave the clarity on 10 for now as well. And it has a light color cast, which you guys might not even be able to see depending on the connection and depending on the settings of your monitor. It's very slight, and we can always handle that later on with an adjustment layer curve in Photoshop, so no real need to take care of that. I like the temperature, so I think we're good as far as this part of the image is concerned. Let's just make sure there's no sharpening, and let's make sure we bring in some noise reduction. All right, so open this one up. And let's go right back into the raw converter and process the part that is going to be the windows and doors. Of course, we want to bring down the exposure. Let's even take it down a little. I think minus 0.2 is okay. Bring up the recovery. If you see between 36 and 46, there's hardly any difference. Doesn't really make much of a difference. So we've kind of reached the threshold. So we just leave it at 35. And take down the fill light. Always keep in mind the difference between the first exposure and the second exposure shouldn't be too big, shouldn't be too recognizable. Because if you have some parts in an image that are very, very, very bright, and then others are compared are very dark, it's something you will notice. What else can we do? We could bring up the contrast a little bit, or actually take it down. Doesn't really make a big difference. Let's just leave it at 15. We can take down the brightness a little bit. That'll help. Let's set it to 35. And I kind of like the way the windows and doors look right now. We can see what's going on outside. And since this part was highly overexposed, just as the floor is down here, there is no info. So there's nothing we can bring back. It's a lot easier to actually resurrect an underexposed image than to bring back a heavily overexposed image, because if it's heavily overexposed, where there is no info, there's nothing you can bring back. So yeah, in this case, I think we probably won't be able to do much better than that. So let's open it up and bring the two exposures together. Make sure you keep your safety copy down here. Move this one over. Get rid of this one. Place them, place them both on top of each other, right on top of each other. And since the brighter layer, which is layer 0 copy, I'm going to name this one bright, this one dark. So it's easier to recognize which one is which. So since the brighter layer is basically, or makes out the most part of the image, and we're only going to use the doors and the door frames from our darker exposure, we're going to keep this one on top, and it's the same procedure as I've already showed you with the underexposed image. It's just the other way around. So use a layer mask. Select your brush, adjust the size and the hardness. Make sure it's set to black, and start painting onto the layer mask to bring through the darker exposure. Now in this case, we are lucky to have these frames, because we can actually use these frames as well as the border between our brighter and our darker exposure. If we wouldn't have that, it's always a little hard to find the right line to, or where to bring in the darker or the brighter exposure, depending on what you're working on. But whenever you have straight lines like this, make use of them. Now again, since this is just for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to be too detailed and too exact, but I think you get the point and the impression. Now see, right here would be it would be easy to actually recognize that we were using a second exposure. So I think we don't really want that in here right now. Let's take it back a little bit. Simply paint in with white to get rid of it. Switch back to black. Turn up the opacity and paint in the other window or door. Now, please, if you do this, take us a little bit more time and be a little more accurate than I am right now. So let's take this back up here. We don't really want that. Here as well. See, there's a nice straight line we can make use of. This one as well. And I think I darkened her as well, which is okay for her hair. So we get, oops, I'm in the wrong layer, sorry. Which is okay for her hair because we are getting rid of the noise, but we don't want her shoulder or arm or anything like that to be darkened. So this. Let's take a look at what we've actually done. This is the way it looked before. This is the way it looks now. And this was an investment and time investment of, if I would have done this like really accurate, it probably would have taken me like 15 minutes, I'd say. So I think it's well worth the time. The result justifies it. So yeah, I think that's it for this part. Always keep in mind that since I wanted to speed it up, I only use 2 exposures. But sometimes you might have up to 4 or 5 exposures. Yeah, so let's move on, and hopefully you guys have some questions for me.
Yeah, okay, so what I'm going to do, I have a few questions, and I'm going to try to take the people with the questions off mute so they can ask you directly, so you guys can interact. Mm-hmm. So the first one, okay, the first one comes from Matthew Aaron Roth. So Matthew, I think you're off mute, so go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I was wondering, for studio shoots like this, why not just bracket so you have different levels of exposure, and you can just pull those images instead of creating underexposed and overexposed images from a master image. You know, for studio stuff it works. I do sports stuff where it may not work, and, you know, creating a secondary image is beneficial, but why not bracket and save you time in the post-production?
Yeah, I totally agree, and thank you actually for that comment. Unfortunately, either, I don't know, some photographers aren't aware of the function of the camera, or I don't know what's the reason for it, but I barely ever receive images that have been bracketed. So you're absolutely right, especially if you're in a studio, and especially if your camera is on a tripod and you have the same perspective or the same shot all the time. Bracketing makes sense totally. You're absolutely right. But unfortunately, a lot of photographers don't do it or don't use it. This was meant, or this tutorial was meant for the case, which is the case most of the time, for the case if you do not have different exposures of one image. So you have to create them yourself. But you're right.
Okay. The next question comes from Paul Simcock. Paul, you are off mute. Okay, Paul? All right. I'll ask on his behalf. So, oh.
Yeah.
Paul, are you there? Okay, no Paul. Oh, I'll ask on his behalf. So Corbis asks for a maximum white point and a minimum black point. If I remember correctly, something like 251, 251, 251, and 444. Could you talk about how best to achieve these? Thank you.
Yeah, it's very simple actually. Right now it's 555 and 250 for all. It's 5 for all the channels for the shadows and 250 for the highlights for all the channels. There's a couple of different ways to achieve it. What I usually do is I open up one adjustment layer curve on top of all of my other curves and on top of all my other layers. So it affects all the layers that are underneath. And what I do, I click on the darkest point, which of course is down here, and I bring it up by 5 points. And always keep in mind, this is the general curve. It's the global curve, the RGB curve. So it goes for all channels. And the same thing with the highlights. Bring them down 250. Now, you do lose some contrast, but it's hardly recognizable, and there's no way to get around it. Especially if you've worked on your contrasts before, it's okay to lose a little bit of contrast for this. Now, this is the fastest and easiest way to do it. And if you do, now this doesn't help against color casts or anything. You would have to go into the channels separately. But to take care of your highlights and your shadows and set them to 5 and 250, this will do.
Great. Okay, the next question comes from Duncan Smith. Duncan, I'm taking you off mute, so go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, hi, Jan. Yeah, I just wondered if you ever use the color range to select the brighter parts of your image to create your adjustment mask with.
I'm sorry, I had a little audio problem, and I didn't really.
Can you hear me okay?
I'm sorry.
Is that clearer? Can you hear me now? Okay, yeah, the question was, do you ever use the color range tool in Select to create the adjustment layer mask? So
I do use. We actually are going to use adjustment layer masks in the next tutorial, and I do use it sometimes. Most of the times, what I do is I make a luminance selection. So I would go, let's say, I would go and just select for maybe I want to work on the skin tones, so that would pretty much affect the red channel. So what I do is I would go into the red channel and make a luminance selection there. I sometimes do make color range selections, but it totally depends on what I want to do, what I want to achieve. And in Photoshop, there's always at least 2, if not way more than that, ways to actually get to the same result in the end. Yeah, but color range selections are a useful tool, and I do use them sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, that seems to be all the questions for now. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part.
Okay. We don't need to save that. And let's move on to our image polish. Now, as I've said, I'm going to work on a fairly average shot, just to use an image that gives us a lot of space to kind of play around. Let me open up the file in Photoshop to show you what I mean. Now, right now it looks kind of flat. It has a little bit of a red cast in here. It's not looking very modern, not very contemporary. Just it's not a nice shot. But we're going to change that with a couple of quick and easy things. For example, we are going to use layer masks, we're going to use luminance selection, and so on. So as I said before, I like to keep it neutral. You will see why, because we are going to add a lot of contrast to this image. So if I would have processed it out of my converter with a lot of contrast, I don't have much room left to play with. So that's my strategy. You can do whatever you like, whatever you feel comfortable with, but that's the way I work. So let's duplicate the layer, name it background, so we know which one is our background layer. Now I usually start off by cleaning the image. So I'll remove anything in there that bothers me, that distracts from what really should catch your eye. Basically anything that's just not needed in there. So the first thing I would do in this case is get rid of this thing, whatever it is, on the door. And there's, as always in Photoshop, there's different ways to get there and different tools to get there. Now, you could use the spot healing brush, you could use the patch tool, you could use the clone stamp. In this case, just to demonstrate it, I'm going to use the spot healing brush with an option that was introduced in CS5. It's called Content Aware. Now, it works very well for small spots. For example, if you're working on skin and you want to get rid of some spots or something, it doesn't really work too well for big areas. So let's see what it does to this one right here. Well, it's okay, but it's nothing that I would be satisfied with, or nothing that I would accept. Now, usually, if you're using the spot healing brush, sometimes, as I said, for small things it'll do, but usually it's a combination of the spot healing brush and the patch tool, which has become kind of my favorite tool in Photoshop because you can use it for all sort of things. I use it for beauty retouch. I use it to take away flyaways. I use it for things like that. It's my weapon of choice when it comes to removing things. So, oh, and whenever you're using the patch tool, this is something you're going to see. It's a little tricky when you're working on edges, or if you have angles, almost right angles like we do here. So if you're working on edges with straight lines, to get a better result, what you want to do is go to the edge first, just select the part that's on the edge, and then go on and select the rest. And I think this is the result that we can live with for now. Now you could always do better. I would probably go on and use the clone stamp a little bit to make it look a bit better than it is right now. But I think if we zoom out, it's all right. It's okay for now. So let's get rid of this thing as well. I don't know what it is, a doorbell or light or whatever. See how good and how fast that works on things like that? Disappears immediately. There's this alarm system up here. Don't need it. We don't need this one. Now again, the edges first. Let me just show you real quick what it does if you don't do it like this. First of all, since there's a perspective in here, you wouldn't even be able to remove the entire thing at once. Because if I do, it's either on top or down here. Either on top or down here, it doesn't fit. So I could do it like this and then take care of this. What I usually do is go back a couple of steps. So what I usually do is this. I work on the edge first. And then I get rid of the entire rest that's left. Okay, I think this is good for now. We can clean up this part here a little bit better. Now that we're looking at the car, cars are a little bit tricky, or a little bit are objects of concern, I would say. Usually we are not allowed to show, or not usually, but we are not allowed, we cannot show any branding. And we cannot even show a car that's recognizable just by its shape. Let's take a Porsche, which has a very, very unique shape. You will always be able to recognize a Porsche. So even if you do not show the branding, even if you do not show the name Porsche or anything, having a Porsche, even if it's in the background of your image, is a no-go, because it's recognizable. In this case, you can't see any branding, and this could be a BMW, it could be an Audi, it could be whatever, I don't know, some convertible sedan. So in this case, and it's blurry. So in this case, we can live with it. But usually, if you have cars in your image, make sure it's not recognizable what kind of car it is. Bring this up a little bit more. Get rid of this little dark thing here in the corner. Kind of distracts my eye, so it bothers me. So for this, I'm using the clone stamp. And for those of you who don't know this tool, what it does, it copies a part of the image which you define. And you define it by holding down the Alt key. Once you hold down the Alt key, there's going to be a little cursor like this. And you can select the part that you want to copy or clone. And then simply click in where you want it to be. And it's cloning the part from here over to there. Now, you have probably noticed the little flares down here, which come or which result from the backlit shot. And I know that back in the days, people would take this out because it was considered an artifact. Actually, it's created by the lens. Because it's shooting right into the light of the sun. If you're shooting against the flash or whatever, if you're shooting against the bright light source, you're always going to get little artifacts like this. But if you look at contemporary commercial photography, or take a look at Hollywood blockbusters, flares have become a very important stylistic element. I'm going to finish off this image using a couple of flares I'm going to show you later on. And so we don't want to get rid of this. I actually want to emphasize this later on. Flares are, nowadays, are part of the contemporary look of commercial photography. Now, this might be a trend, and it might be over in a couple of years, but for now, we want flares, so don't take them out. And by the way, I forgot to mention that in the beginning. Actually, this image consists of 3 RAWs I have processed. The first one I did, was just the guy in the foreground, so I made sure that he's equally lit up. The second part was this part up here, which was a little blown out and overexposed due to the sun. And this part down here, the car and the door, were a little bit dark, so I brightened that up. So we basically have 3 exposures combined in here. One for the dude, one for the sky up here, and basically one for the rest of the image. So we've removed objects. Next step would be a little beauty retouch, just to take out some of the small things that bother me. Don't use too much time for that. It's not a beauty shot. It's a lifestyle. It's lifestyle people photography. So don't be too precise, but give it some time. On there, flyaways up here. Those. Now again, please keep in mind that I would spend a little bit more time on this than I'm doing right now, but not too much. I'd say for an image like that, if I wouldn't be talking that much as I am right now, for an image like that, I'd probably need about 20 minutes to get it done. Okay, image objects removed, skin clean. What else? I think the dark shadows under his eyes could be brightened up a little. So for this, go back to the clone stamp, switch from normal mode to lighten, take down the opacity to 15, 14, whatever, something like that. Like that. Make it a little smaller. That, and now take out the wrinkles and the dark shadows a little bit, not too much, because it'll just look artificial and fake, and I don't know, like he's been to the like he's had some surgery done or whatever, so don't take it too far. Okay, now we're going to move on to the interesting part. I'm going to add 3 layers that basically make out 95% of my look. I usually start off with what I call the soft light and high pass layer, basically because it consists of a high pass filter in combination with a soft light blending mode or a soft light layer mode. So duplicate your background, go to filters, other, high pass, and now we are doing something that we usually do not do because it'll look weird and it's just too much detail and it also causes artifacts. We don't want that, but for now we're going to crank up the radius to 50 or something like that. And now change the layer blending mode from normal to soft light. And if I turn this layer off and on, you see what it does. It adds a lot of detail, actually too much for now, but it just makes it more crispy. And this is usually the first step I do, but we don't want to leave it at 100%. So let's take it down to about half of it. 50% I think is okay. Next step, actually let's name this layer so we don't mix them up later on. This is the high pass and soft light layer. Next layer is going to add a lot of contrast. To do this, you go to Image, Adjustments, and select Black and White. Now this brings up this black and white dialog, and of course it turns the image into a black and white image. And you have different presets up here. This is the default preset. You can create your own presets and save them, or you can choose one of the other defaults, or presets, not defaults, one of the other presets that's in this drop-down menu. Now, I can only encourage you to play around with that. Try some of the options that are in here. It's comparable to a luminance selection. Now, therefore it's named blue, green, infrared, black, white, red. You see, blue, green, and red are our 3 channels. And what it does, it's basically selecting parts of the image that are I'm missing the words here a little bit in English. I'm sorry about that. It would be a lot easier for me to explain it in German. Anyway, what is that? Pardon me?
It's basically selecting the colors within that light spectrum.
Within that range, exactly. Yeah, within that light spectrum. Right. Thank you, Joe. So play around with it. Depending on what you choose, you will realize. Take a look at it. That it's actually affecting different parts of the image, and it's giving it a different look. Now, if you want to boost the contrast in the darker areas, blue filter would be my weapon of choice. But again, maybe maximum black would, it depends on your image. Maybe maximum black would be a better choice. Play around with it. So for now, it's the blue filter. And to actually get rid of the black and white, we're going to change the blending mode again. And we can either set it to soft light or to overlay. Again, this depends on your taste. It depends on the look you want to achieve. It depends on the image you have. I want to add a lot of contrast in here, so I'm going to choose overlay and then reduce the opacity again. I think 30 is fine. Let's name this layer black and white, blue, contrast. There we go. And at the third and final layer to create our look. Now I could keep on going and add like 10 more layers, but I wanted to show you a fairly quick and easy way to get a look. So duplicate, you know the procedure, go to image, go to adjustments, go to black and white, and now we want to affect another color range. So we are going to choose high contrast red. This was the one we chose before, blue filter. High contrast red affects the brighter part of the image. Okay, and again, set it to either soft light or overlay. I'm going to choose overlay and take it down to 30 as well. I think even a bit less than that. Yeah, 25. Now, let's take a look at what we've done so far. This is the way it looked in the beginning. This is the way it looks now. If you ask me, that's quite a difference. Now, this is basically what makes the look. These are the most important steps. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply a couple of adjustment layers to improve the image. And I'm going to use the adjustment layer curves for that. First of all, I want to brighten up his eyes a little bit. I'm going to make a rough selection around his eyes. I'm going to make this selection a bit bigger because we have this shadow up here I want to reduce a little bit. feather my selection so we don't get any hard edges. And select one of the adjustment layers from the drop-down menu, Curves, and simply bring up the curve a little bit to brighten up his eyes and the eyeshadows. Now, all these three layers, sorry, let me give this one a name real quick. This one is the black and white red contrast layer. Now, all these layers, if I turn out, you can see that if I turn up the background layers, basically, just they just are there for the contrast. The purpose is to give the image the look. So if you want to do some additional retouching, you always have to work on your background layer. So to brighten up the eyes a little bit more, I'm going to choose my background layer, select the dodge tool on my menu, select the midtones as the range to effect up here, and the exposure set to 14%, and then simply paint in his eyes a little bit to brighten them up a little bit more. Okay. What else? I think his skin has a slight blue cast, so I'm just going to make a rough selection around this dude. Very rough, but that's fine. Feather it. And use another adjustment layer curve to reduce the blue a little bit. Now for that, I'm going to select the blue channel, of course, and then click on his forehead while with this little pipette, while holding down the command button, or if you're on a PC, which hopefully you're not, hold down the Windows button, or if you are on a Mac with an old keyboard, hold down the Apple button, Apple key. Okay, hold down the command button and simply click on his forehead or wherever you want to click, and this is going to add a little dot in our curve right here. There we go. Now if I just take down this dot a few steps, let's say 3 steps, it takes out the blue in his skin. It also introduces a little bit of green, so to get rid of that, again, switch into the green channel, hold down the command button. In this case, I'm going to use his hair as a reference. Click in his hair and take down a little bit of green. Now, you might not even be able to see what I'm actually doing or see the effect on your screen at home, but this is usually how I get rid of color cast. Okay, so we have an adjustment layer for his skin tone. We have an adjustment layer to brighten up his eyes. I'm going to add one more adjustment layer for his hair. So I want it to be a little more contrasty and a little brighter. Feather it. And apply another curve. Now I'm making use of my S curve again to give his hair more contrast, make it a bit more crispy. I still feel that his skin could be a little bit more desaturated, so I'll just click into the mask I already have created, holding down the command button, and this will create a selection. There we go. Now all I have to do is open up another adjustment layer. In this case, it's hue and saturation. And the layer mask I have already used for this curve up here is going to be used for the saturation as well. There you go. So let's take down the red a little bit. Like this. All right. Now as the final step to finish off this image, I already told you we are going to add a flare. And we do have flares for download on the contributor gateway. You can download and use for your images for free. But you would have to add them manually. And this, to make it look realistic, it takes a little bit of time. So since I'm using flares a lot, I have invested, or the company has invested, around $100. It's not more than that. I think it's around $100. Might be a little bit more, but not much. In a plugin that's by Red Light Giant Software, and it's called the Knoll Light Factory. And what it does, it lets you move around. Let me demonstrate it. It lets you move around the source of light with your mouse, just like that. So you can place it wherever the light is coming from in your image. In this case, it would be the sun up here. And as you can see, the flares move with this light source. And it's always physically correct. It's the way the flares would look if you would be using a certain lens and you would shoot against the light. There's a couple of different presets, actually a whole lot of presets in this menu on the left side right here. Let me show you a couple more. This one, for example, which looks a little bit like the flare that come with Photoshop, kind of cheap. I don't really like them. But for example, Rock Concert is a cool one. It's a little hard to see, but maybe if I brighten up the poly spreads a little bit, there you go. And you actually get to adjust the brightness, the size, the scale, the count or the amount of polys that are in here, the angle. You get to adjust all this separately. But in this case, I want a nice sunny day like we had in the beginning. So let me place the flare, or the flare or the source of light up here, and work on the poly spread a little bit, make it a little brighter. Work on the position a little bit, like that. Make it a bit bigger, like that. And I think we're good for now. Now this takes a little while for the filter or for Photoshop to res the filter. Oh, and I made a big mistake. I'm sorry. I used the high pass and soft light layer to place the flare on. This is why you're not seeing it right now. So let me go back one step and add an extra layer for our flare. Now to do so, just add a new layer, fill it with black, and set the blending mode to screen. If you set the blending mode to screen, everything that's black will turn transparent. You can do it on an empty layer as well. The result looks the same. I prefer the black layer with the screen mode because it's a lot easier to see your flare on the background. Let me add the flare again. Oh, also, I've seen, since this has become very popular, as I've said before, it's become an important stylistic element. I've seen flares in images where there is no source of light. where there is no backlight, no light coming from the back shining into the lens. That doesn't make sense. So do not add flares in images where there is no light shining into the direction of the photographer or the viewer. It just looks fake. Let me reduce the opacity to 60, I think is okay, maybe a bit more. 65. And it gives the image a nice, because it gives it a glow as well, you can see back here, and on his hair and his face, gives it a nice, warm finish. So, yeah, that's it for this part of the tutorial.
Okay, so, yeah, hi. I don't see any questions just yet, but while I give you guys the opportunity to go ahead and ask some questions using the chat module, I want to say that Jan referred to those flare brushes from the previous webinar. In the chat module, I posted the link to that, so you can go ahead and download that link. Also, for your information, I have at the moment at least 2 commercial editors with me here in the room, and I think I still have 1 editorial editor on the phone. I think I have Dave Ross on the phone. He hasn't run away just yet. So if you have any questions that you want to ask of them while we have them, go ahead and I'll do that at the end of this meeting. But let me go back to the last portion of this webinar. I actually took the wrong Paul off of mute. So I said Paul Simcock instead of Paul Thompson. But let me go ahead and ask that question. So as a follow-up question to you, Jan, just going back, when you were adjusting the highlights and the shadow levels, you were using curves. And his question is using the output levels as good rather than just using curves?
Well, you can use the levels as well. I would say that the difference is that the curve, if you're using the levels, the distribution of I'm missing the words again. The range the range of dark and bright parts or areas in your image will be pushed together a little bit if you're using the levels. And if you're using the curve, it's simply being cut off. That's the only difference. So I would say you can use the levels as well. I sometimes do. That's fine. And since it's only 5 points anyway, it's so hard for the human eye to actually see and make a difference.
Yeah, I still don't see questions, but I want to make a comment on the flare. I mean, when you talk about when you talk about investing time and energy into an image, you notice the amount of time that Jan spends on these files really to try to up the quality level. So, when you talk about a plugin like the No Light Factory, it's a relatively small investment that you make that really goes a long way, and you can see it's probably only like $100, like he said. So, we're not afraid. I'm a Photoshop purist, and I think Jan is too, but we're not afraid to go ahead and make those investments if it means really pushing your image to the next level. So, no questions. Quiet group today. Okay. So, okay, Jan, let's go ahead and let's move on.
Yeah, I'm always a little worried when there are no questions, meaning it's either too simple or it's too hard.
I know. Okay. Well, if you have any, let's see. Oh, here's one question from Duncan Smith. He says, that tutorial was excellent, and I liked
Thank you, Duncan.
And I like the added contrast. Is it possible to keep the overall feel, but remove that shadow on his shoulder?
Are you talking about? Oh, Duncan, are you talking about this little shadow right here?
All right, Duncan, I've taken you off mute.
Do you mean something?
Duncan, you're off mute.
Oh, yes, I do mean that. Yes, yes. I was typing my own.
Yeah, you do have a good eye. You do have a good eye.
Well, it seems quite strong, and out of all the things you've added to that image, I think that one is slightly detracts from it. For me, it looks slightly fake.
Actually, I'm glad you saw it and you were able to see it. Usually, this would have been something I would have taken out. Like, I wouldn't have left the image the way it is. I just did it for now to be a little quicker. Yeah, you can easily get rid of it. Simply use a layer mask, and just the way we did before, and set it to soft, and then go along this corner. And oh, I'm sorry, I was fading with. And simply take it out. Just take out in this little area, and you're getting rid of the shadow. Actually, the shadow was caused by the high pass filter. That's what it does. So if you want to get rid of it, just use layer mask, just like that.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, all right, I think that's it for now, so let's go ahead. We're about 10 minutes to the end. We still have a few things to go through, so Jan, let's go ahead and move on.
Yeah. Okay, the other two tutorials are fairly easy, and they won't take up much time, so I think we'll almost be able to finish in time. So what I'm going to do is we are going to create digital smoke, just like the smoke you see in this image right here over the cigarette. This is smoke that I created, and it's basically a combination of 3 filters and the warp tool. That's basically it. So we don't need this for now. Let's open up a new file. 12 by 12 inches is fine. 8-bit. I'm always working on 8-bit. We had the question yesterday why I'm not working on 16-bit. I can tell you why. First of all, file size doubles when you're using 16. Second of all, it slows down your computer and Photoshop a lot. And third reason, my eye, and I assume your eye, is not able to see the difference between a 16-bit and an 18-bit image. Plus, there are filters in Photoshop that do not work when you're in 16-bit mode. So I always go for 8-bit. 300 pixels an inch, 12 by 12 inches, that's fine. Now we are going to need a black background because we're going to paint or we're going to draw white smoke. Otherwise, we won't be able to see it. Now let's add a new layer for our smoke. Select the brush tool. Make it very soft, so it's 0% hardness, and choose a medium-sized brush because we are going. Make sure it's not too thin, because we are going to use a filter later on that is going to make the lines I'm drawing right now a lot thinner. So if you're already painting too thin, the lines will be gone. And simply paint something like this. that'll do for now. It doesn't really look like smoke, but we're now going to use the first filter that is actually going to make it look a little bit like smoke. Now, what I like to do is I like to fill the areas between the lines I've drawn with a little bit of haze or fog or mist or whatever you want to call it. And to do this, I'm going to set down the opacity to 10, 12, something like that. Choose the right size of my brush, and then simply fill these areas with a little bit of white as well. A little bit around it. Now comes the actual clue, and that is the filter that's called maximum. Now this is a little misleading because it's actually, let me apply it so you see it. It's actually making it smaller. See that? Actually making the lines thinner. But this is what we want to get something that starts to look like smoke. That's the maximum filter. So that's the first filter I'm applying. Now I'm going to keep this layer because I'm going to make use of it later on. But actually, before I do, I want to apply another filter, and that is going to be a distortion filter, namely Twirl. Now it's hard to see what we are actually doing because it's white on a white background, but you get an impression of what it does down here. So I'm going to twist or give the fog, the smoke, a little twist. I think 60 something degrees is fine. There we go. Now I'm going to duplicate it, as I said before, and turn this layer on top off, but we're going to need it later. Now the next step is going to be the warp tool. And we use the warp tool by selecting Edit, Transform, Warp. And now I'm going to bring together all four corners of my warp tool and actually cross them. Just like that. Do the same thing down here. Just play around with it a little so you get a shape that looks more like smoke. Here we go. Sorry, actually, I made a little mistake. It wasn't right to duplicate the layer before I apply the warp tool. So let's get rid of this one and duplicate the one right now, because we need to apply the warp tool first. Now the next step is going to be another filter, and that would be the blur filter, namely Gaussian blur. Because right now it still looked too defined, so we need to blur it a little, just like this. And now that we've kept the copy on top, I'm actually going to apply another filter to make it look even a bit more realistic. And I'm going to use my original layer, duplicate it, and apply the surface blur. Yeah, that looks good to me. And now all I need to do is reduce the opacity Okay, we can leave the one on the very bottom at 100%. That's okay. This is what it looks like. Now this one comes on top, and I'm going to set the opacity to 60% or something. And the one on the very top, only not really supposed to be seen, just very slightly. So I'm going to set it to 8% or something like that. Now all three combined together, merge together with the background layer, look like this. And all I need to do, add this to the image where I want my smoke to be. Move it over. Oh, I'm sorry. I closed the wrong image. Again. Move it over. Okay. Now we can close this one. Don't need it. And as we've done before, we're going to set this layer to screen mode to make the black see-through. Here we go. Now all I need to do is resize it by hitting Command T for transform. And set down the opacity so it doesn't look fake. Here we go. That's our digitally created smoke. And you can actually use that for, I don't know, coffee, a cup of coffee, or a pot that's sitting on the oven, or whatever. You just have to make a different shape. You just would have to draw a different shape in the beginning. But basically all the filters, the maximum filter, the twirl filter, the blur filter, Gaussian blur, and the surface blur, all these 4 filters in combination will turn this, or will turn whatever you have drawn into smoke or steam.
Okay, so I do realize we're over time. Jan has one more thing he wants to show, so we're going to go ahead and finish that. If you have nowhere else to go, please stay on. I don't see any questions yet, so go ahead and ask some questions. I'll remind you again that we do have editors and art directors here, so now is your chance to get some feedback at the end of the meeting. I'll also say one thing as well. Jan is going to be making available a free set of actions just after this meeting. Jan, do you want to talk about that before you finish the last section?
Yeah. I'm going to give away a couple of actions for Photoshop. I've created a kind of simple thing, actually. What they do is they add adjustment layer curves on top of your image and reduce them back to the background. Basically, they give your images what I call an vintage or analog camera look, just like it's very popular right now. You've probably seen it with Hipstamatic or Instagram or all these photo apps you get for your smartphone, or you even get filters like that for Photoshop. It's just a little playing around with the color channels in your curve. That's basically what it is, and it'll give the image a vintage look. Let me just demonstrate it real quick on this one. For example, this would be what I call the 60s look. There you go. It's that easy. And right. you will get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different looks. One is going to be sort of like a cross-processing look, like when you used to cross-process your film back in the days. One is going to be kind of a yellow burn. One is going to add a little red cast. So yeah, it's kind of like the Lomo or the Hipstamatic for Photoshop. Okay, do one last thing. It's really quick, but it's very handy, and it's a tool that I kind of like. It's the content-aware fill. It's new in Photoshop CS5, and it's the perfect tool to remove objects, especially bigger objects like this girl, from backgrounds that have a pattern which is not repeating, or that have a pattern which is non-uniform. If this would be a brick wall, I wouldn't use this, because the brick wall has right angles. It has a geometric pattern that wouldn't work. But especially on non-repeating, non-uniform patterns, the content-aware fill is the right weapon, or the right choice. All you need to do is make a selection around the object you want to remove, and make sure that you give the selection enough space. If you're too close to your object you want to remove, it'll work, but it'll look weird. Also, what you need is enough space around your selection, because what the tool does is it analyzes the pixels around your selection and samples from those pixels to create a new fill for your selection. So if you do not have enough space around it, there's nothing that Photoshop can sample from. So make sure you make a selection that's big enough, and make sure you have enough space around the selection. Now all you need to do is go to Edit, Fill, Content Aware from the drop-down menu, click OK, and wait a couple of seconds for Photoshop. Oh, and there you go. It's done. Very easy, very quick, and it's a lot better than using the clone stamp, for example. It just looks way more natural, more realistic. So that's it for me for today. Thank you for your attention. Thanks for joining and for your interest.